I found out the truth the day he held her hand at our anniversary dinner. Not mine, ours. We were seated at a candlelit table, friends clapping, champagne flowing. And there he was, my husband of 8 years, brushing his fingers against my sister's wrist like he couldn't help himself. I smiled through it, nodded when people toasted, but inside, something cracked. Not just because of the betrayal, but because suddenly everything made sense. The nights he turned away, the way he lit up when she walked into the room. I used to blame myself. Maybe I wasn't exciting enough. Maybe I wasn't soft enough. But that night, I stopped making excuses. I didn't cry. I didn't confront. I just watched. Quietly. Because that was the moment I knew love wasn't blind. It was deliberate. And I had been chosen for convenience, while she had been loved in secret. I died in silence. But I wasn't staying dead. The next morning, I made him breakfast like nothing happened. Scrambled eggs, toast, and a smile I'd practiced for years. He sat across from me, thanked me with a kiss on the cheek, routine, cold, meaningless. I watched him read the news, sip his coffee, and pretend everything was fine. And I let him. Because the worst thing you can do to a man who's certain you'll always beg is show him how quietly you can disappear without moving an inch. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. I needed facts, not feelings. So I kissed him back, told him I loved him, and made a note in my mind. He will never see this coming. My sister, Haley, had always been the golden girl. Sparkling laughter, perfect skin, the kind of magnetism that made people hand her things she never earned. She was always the center. And I, her shadow, smiling, reliable, invisible. I watched her steal my birthdays, my mother's affection, and eventually my husband. I should have seen it coming. The way she comforted him when we fought. The way she praised him while teasing me. "He's too good for you," she once said, half laughing. I thought she was joking. But Haley never jokes. She plans. And this time, she'd taken what she believed was hers, like always. I found the messages a week later. Not hidden, not protected, just lazy. He used a separate messaging app, but forgot to disable notifications. One popped up while he was in the shower. From her. "Last night was perfect. I dreamt of you again." That's all it took. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even touch his phone. I just memorized the name, the tone, the timestamp. Proof. Solid. Irrefutable. And in that moment, my heart didn't shatter. It shifted. Something in me snapped into place. I wasn't going to beg for a man who never chose me. I was going to burn down everything he built around her. I started documenting everything. Every time he left the house. Every lie he told. I replayed old conversations, reread old messages, and it all became clear. He had married me because I was safe. I was easy to manipulate, to keep in place. A pretty puppet in his picture-perfect life. But Haley? She was the obsession. The forbidden. The one he couldn't have. Until now. I realized they had been playing the long game. Using me as the buffer. The bridge between their guilt and their fantasy. And while they built a future behind my back, I was about to steal it from under their feet. At work, I smiled. Polite. Productive. No one suspected that behind my neatly pressed blazer was a woman unraveling, but with precision. I met with a lawyer. Quietly. No drama. No announcement. Just research. Just options. My name was on the house. My name was on the account. My name was tied to everything he thought he controlled. And once I had the facts, I made my move. I started transferring money. Piece by piece. Legal. Undetected. Protected. Because I wasn't leaving with just my dignity. I was leaving with everything. I bought a second phone. Secret. Clean. And I began recording. Their phone calls. The whispered hotel bookings. The lies he told when I asked where he'd been. I asked calmly, pretending to trust him, and he lied with such confidence it almost made me laugh. He had no idea the woman across from him was already gone, already plotting, already packing her emotional bags. Every sweet, "I love you," I gave him was a bullet in the chamber. And I was patient. Because revenge is best served slow, when they're comfortable, when they think they've won. Haley started showing up more often. For family dinners, for check-ins. She smiled at me like she'd done nothing wrong, while he sat beside me with guiltless eyes. They didn't know I was watching them so closely, how she placed her hand too close to his on the couch, how he glanced at her when he thought I wasn't looking. They weren't just betraying me, they were mocking me. That's when I made the decision. I wouldn't expose them in rage. I'd rise without a word, and when they looked around, I'd be gone, and so would everything they built. I pretended to be sick one night, and stayed home while he went to the gym. 2 hours later, I followed him, parked down the street from the hotel, watched him meet her at the lobby. She wore white. He held her like she was fragile and precious, the same hands that had once promised me forever. I took pictures, not for the court, for myself, because I needed to see it, to bury the illusion I'd clung to for too long. I wasn't sad. I wasn't shocked. I was done. And that kind of clarity, it doesn't fade. It erupts. Back home, I packed a bag. Not to run, but to move. To begin. I'd already secured an apartment in another district. Clean. Untouched by memories. I filed the divorce the next morning. My lawyer sent the papers to his office. And while he stared at the envelope in confusion, Haley texted me. "Did you know he's planning to propose to me?" I replied. "Did you know he no longer owns anything?" She didn't respond, but I could feel the ripple, the one that comes when people finally realize the puppet had been pulling the strings all along. He came home late that night, humming some careless tune, swinging the door open like he still lived in a world where I didn't know. I was in the kitchen, calm. I asked if he wanted dinner. He said he already ate. I nodded, smiled. Not because I was being sweet, but because I wanted to see how long he'd keep lying when his life was already unraveling. "Everything okay?" he asked, pulling off his tie. "Perfect," I said. It was the truth, because that was the last night he'd ever walk into a home where he held power. And I wanted to remember him like this, clueless, casual, completely unaware that the life he thought was secure was seconds from collapse. The next morning, the locks were changed. His card declined at the gas station. The company car revoked. I watched from my new apartment as the world stopped spinning around him. He tried calling. I didn't pick up. I wanted him to sit in it. In the silence, in the confusion. Haley called next. Her message was short. "What are you doing?" I didn't respond, because it was never about answering their questions. It was about making them ask them for the first time. They weren't in control anymore. And that terrified them, as it should. He showed up at my office the next day, jaw tight, eyes wild. "We need to talk," he said. I looked up from my desk. "We've said enough." He blinked like I slapped him. I didn't raise my voice, didn't cry. I simply handed him the envelope from my drawer, the one with every account closed, every asset shifted, every thread of connection cut. "You loved her," I said. "Good. She can have you now. But you won't be living off what I built." He didn't speak, just stared. I leaned back in my chair. "You should go. I have real work to do." And he left. That was the moment I knew I had finally become untouchable. Haley tried to play victim next. Posted vague quotes on social media. "You can't choose who you love. Some people are just jealous of your happiness." I didn't flinch, because when a liar loses control, they get loud. I stayed silent. My revenge wasn't noise. It was the reality they now had to live in, each other. No more sneaking. No more blaming me. Just them, exposed and empty, having to figure out what love looks like when there's no one left to hurt. I got promoted the following week. My team said I was glowing. I was. Not because of the title or the pay increase, but because I finally felt light, not held down by betrayal, not anchored to people who wanted my silence. Just me, reborn, rewritten, reclaimed. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I wore red lipstick to meetings. laughed without checking if it was too loud. I had mourned the woman I used to be. Now, I was celebrating the woman I became. And no man, no sister, no ghost of my past could dim that. I blocked their numbers, deleted the photos, cleared the memories that no longer served me. People asked if I missed him. I said, "You don't miss cages once you've flown." And I meant it, because love without respect isn't love. It's a leash. And I had broken mine with style. They didn't get to call me bitter. They didn't get to call me dramatic. They lost that right when they treated me like I'd never wake up. But I did. And now, every step I took was one they'd never be able to follow. Haley showed up to my office one last time. No makeup. Eyes puffy. "He left," she said. "He said you ruined him." I smiled calmly. "No, he ruined himself. I just stopped cleaning up after him." She sat down like she belonged, like we were still sisters. "Why didn't you fight for him?" she asked. And I laughed, genuinely. Because I wasn't in love with him. I was in love with the idea of being loved back. She looked stunned. That's what happens when people realize you were never weak. You were just loyal. And once loyalty dies, all that's left is truth. I walked her out of the building myself. Held the door. Wished her well. Not because I forgave her, but because I didn't need vengeance anymore. I had peace. And peace is the only revenge that leaves no blood, just silence. I watched her disappear down the street, a shadow of the girl who once stood above me. And for the first time, I didn't feel like her victim. I felt like her ending. That night, I lit a candle in my new home, curled into my velvet chair, poured a glass of wine, not to forget, but to remember how far I'd come. The apartment was quiet. My phone, still. My mind calm. That was the real triumph. Not destroying them, but creating something they could never touch, a life that was mine. Fully, fiercely, freely. And in that silence, I whispered to no one. I was never hard to love. You were just too selfish to try. I began journaling again. Not the desperate, bleeding pages I used to write at 2 a.m. when I was begging to be seen, but entries that breathed, thoughts about what I liked, places I wanted to go, who I was without him. For the first time, I wasn't writing to be heard. I was writing to understand myself. Because when you spend years being defined by how someone treats you, you forget your own shape. But now, I was rebuilding it. Slowly, beautifully. And every page was proof that I existed beyond their betrayal. That I was still here, and finally becoming. I started traveling. Not far, just weekend trips. Mountains, bookstores, coastlines. Places he never took me because he didn't see the point. But I did. I saw the point in wandering, in eating alone, in taking up space without needing permission. I sat in cafes with a book and didn't wonder who was looking. I hiked a trail and didn't check my phone for texts that never came. Each trip, each moment alone was a declaration. I am not waiting anymore. And in that stillness, I found pieces of myself I didn't know I'd buried just to keep peace with people who never offered me any. People started to notice something had changed. Coworkers, neighbors, even my barista. "You look different," they said. "Lighter." I did. Not because I lost weight or changed my hair, but because I was no longer carrying secrets that didn't belong to me. I stopped being the woman who apologized for her own silence. I stopped explaining my choices. I stopped trying to fix what they broke. And when people see a woman walking with that kind of peace, it unsettles them. They wonder what made her that strong. But they never guess the truth. She got tired of being hurt, so she stopped bleeding for people who wouldn't even offer a bandage. One night, I pulled out my wedding ring. It had been in a drawer, tucked beneath old receipts and tangled jewelry I no longer wore. I held it between two fingers and studied the way it used to sparkle when I thought love meant sacrifice. I remembered the day he gave it to me, the way he didn't meet my eyes when he proposed, the way Haley had cried harder than I did. I finally understood why. She wasn't happy for me. She was grieving her own fantasy, and I had been the placeholder. I dropped the ring into a donation box the next morning. Let someone else turn it into a new beginning. Mine didn't need a symbol. I had already earned my freedom. I hosted a dinner for myself. Just me. A table set for one, with candles and music and a meal I loved. I used the good plates, the ones he said were too fancy for everyday use. I poured wine into a glass that used to sit untouched in the cabinet. I didn't light the candles for a guest. I lit them for me. Because sometimes the greatest act of power isn't revenge, it's celebration. Of your solitude, of your peace, of your ability to sit in a room completely alone and still feel full. That night, I toasted to the woman who stayed, and the one who finally walked away. Haley moved on faster than expected, posted a new boyfriend on her page, some entrepreneur with empty eyes and a perfect jawline. People congratulated her, called her brave. I didn't feel anger. I felt confirmation. She wasn't in love. She was addicted to being chosen, to being seen. But she never once stopped to ask by who. And the man she fought so hard to steal had left her the moment I walked away. That's what happens when people build their self-worth from comparison. They collapse the second the person they were measuring against disappears. I didn't envy her new life. I pitied it. I started mentoring younger women in my field, taught them how to set boundaries, how to negotiate, how to walk away from silence disguised as support. I didn't tell them everything. I didn't need to, but they felt it. The weight behind my words. The earned confidence. How did you become so sure of yourself? One asked. I smiled and said, because I was once sure of everyone else, and it nearly destroyed me. They didn't need the full story to understand the truth, that sometimes becoming powerful isn't about taking anything back. It's about realizing it was yours all along. Adrian came into the picture slowly, steady, no sweeping gestures, just quiet presence. He didn't try to rescue me. He respected the fact that I didn't need one. He listened when I talked, waited when I needed space. And when I asked him one night what made him stay, he said, "You don't ask anyone to shrink to love you. That's rare." I wasn't ready to fall in love, but I was ready to stop pretending that I didn't want to be seen. And he saw me, not as a project, not as a prize, as a person. And that more than anything began to soften the parts of me I thought were gone. We started going on long drives. No destination, just miles and music. I'd watch the road blur outside the window and think, this is what peace feels like. Not silence, but safety. Not stillness, but presence. I wasn't afraid of being left anymore, because I'd already survived the worst kind of abandonment, the kind that happens while you're still in the room. Adrian didn't have to promise forever. He just had to show up. And he did, again and again. And that consistency, that was the kind of love I finally believed I deserved. Because I wasn't waiting to be loved back anymore. I was loving myself forward, and whoever met me there could stay. I found an old voicemail from him while clearing out a backup drive. His voice, so familiar once, now felt like static. He was rambling about dinner plans, about being late again, but promising to make it up to me. I used to replay that message, clinging to the apology as proof that he cared. Listening now, I heard nothing but manipulation. Delayed guilt. Empty routine. I deleted it without hesitation, because healing isn't just moving on. It's no longer needing what once held you hostage. His voice used to be the center of my universe. Now, it didn't even make me pause. One afternoon, I walked past the boutique where I bought my wedding dress. It was still there, still shining in the window, like a symbol of hope. But I didn't stop. I didn't glance in. That dress was never the beginning. It was the costume. The performance I put on while begging for love that didn't exist. And now, I wasn't playing a part anymore. I was the whole production. Script, director, spotlight. And the woman walking past, that shop wasn't broken. She was reborn, with no intention of ever dimming again. A friend invited me to speak at a small women's panel. Topic: rewriting your story after heartbreak. I almost declined. Not because I was afraid to speak, but because I didn't know if I wanted to re-enter that version of me. But something in me whispered, share it. So I did. I stood in front of 20 strangers and told the truth. Not the headline, not the scandal, but the emotion. What it felt like to be replaced, to be lied to be discarded, and what it felt like to come back stronger. By the end, a few women were crying. One came up to me and said, "You made me feel less alone." That was worth every scar. I got a message from his mother months later. Unexpected. Polite. She said she was sorry. That she had no idea what he was doing. That if she had known, she would have spoken up. I read it once, then twice. And I believed her. Not because she deserved my forgiveness, but because I deserved to let go. Carrying anger wasn't strength anymore. It was just weight. So I replied, "Thank you. I'm okay now." And that was it. No grudge. No revenge. Just release. Because when you truly win, you don't need to prove anything. You just live better than they ever imagined. I published a piece under my real name. An essay. Honest. Vulnerable. It was titled, "The Softness That Survived." It went viral. Women across the world commented, emailed, shared their own stories. I cried reading their words. Not out of sadness, but connection. Because for so long, I thought I was the only one carrying betrayal like a second skin. Turns out, we were everywhere. Quiet. Strong. Healing in silence. And now, we weren't hiding anymore. We were writing our names across the sky with ink made of fire and grace. One night, Adrian made me tea after a long day. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just handed me the cup, kissed my forehead, and sat beside me. No fixing. No pressure. Just presence. And I realized that night, I'd spent so many years trying to be the perfect partner for someone who couldn't even see me. And now, I was simply being loved as I was. Not for my potential, not for my compliance, but for my peace, my survival, my softness. And that, more than any grand gesture, made me feel whole. I stopped checking his social media completely, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that healing isn't about watching someone lose. It's about no longer needing them to. His life could be perfect, chaotic, or completely collapsed, and it wouldn't change mine. That's real freedom. When your worth doesn't need to be proven against someone else's downfall. I no longer needed him to hurt, because I was thriving. And that, boss, that's the kind of win no one can steal. I took myself on a birthday trip. Solo. Coastal town. No itinerary. Just morning coffee on balconies and evenings with books I'd never had time to finish. I laughed with strangers. Danced alone. Took photos for myself, not for show. That birthday was the first time I didn't wait for someone to plan something. I planned joy for myself. Because the woman I am now doesn't sit by the phone. She books the ticket. And when I blew out the candle that night, I didn't make a wish. I gave thanks for walking through hell and never letting it harden me. I walked into a bookstore and saw a copy of my own essay printed in an anthology. Front table. Bold title. A woman near me picked it up, flipped to the page, and whispered, "Damn." She didn't know I was the author. She didn't need to, because that moment wasn't about recognition. It was about confirmation. That the version of me who was once too scared to speak had now become a voice in someone else's healing. That's the power of telling the truth. It multiplies. And when it spreads, it saves someone else from thinking their story ends in silence. And mine was just getting started. I turned 32 surrounded by people who didn't know my whole past, but respected my present. Friends I made after the storm. A community I built from scratch. No gossip. No pity. Just women who saw me as I was. Resilient, brilliant, unbothered. We danced under patio lights. Toasted to new chapters. And as I looked around, I realized I didn't miss what I lost. I was too busy loving what I'd found. Because happiness doesn't have to scream either. Sometimes it whispers. You made it in the smallest moments, like music playing while you cook, laughter without tension, or just the sound of your own breath not catching in your throat anymore. I wrote my third piece for a women's magazine. This one wasn't about heartbreak. It was about healing, the part no one claps for. The mornings you wake up and don't feel dread. The meals you eat alone without feeling abandoned. The way your own company becomes something you cherish instead of escape. It resonated, went viral. But it wasn't the numbers that mattered. It was the quiet messages. I'm where you were. Thank you for showing me it gets better. That's the power of surviving without bitterness. You become a lighthouse without trying. You just shine. And someone, somewhere, finds their way by your light. Adrian didn't ask to be in any of the articles. He stayed in the background, supportive, steady. The kind of love that doesn't demand to be seen, but is felt in every room. I used to crave grand gestures. Now, I craved the way he reached for my hand when I was distracted. The way he made space in the closet without asking. The way he listened to understand, not to reply. I didn't need a savior. But standing beside someone who never asked me to dim my fire, that was the kind of softness I never thought I'd earn. Not after everything. And yet here it was, real, resting, mine. I visited my mother, years later. We didn't talk about him. Or Haley. Just tea, quiet glances, and old photos. She didn't apologize. But she didn't have to. Her silence was different now. Not dismissive, just tired. She had her own regrets. I left without bitterness. Not because everything was fixed, but because I didn't need her to change for me to move forward. That's the thing about growth. It doesn't always come with clean endings. Sometimes it just means knowing who you are now, and not waiting for people to catch up. Sometimes peace is just accepting the apology you'll never get, and choosing joy anyway. I took a job offer abroad. Short term. 6 months. A new city, a fresh view. Adrian kissed my forehead and said, "Go. No guilt. No guilt tripping. No neediness. I'll be here when you come back." And I believed him. Because when you've healed, you no longer confuse control for closeness. You learn that real love wants your expansion, not your confinement. That trip became more than a work opportunity. It became another version of me I hadn't met yet. Independent, unattached, unapologetically whole. I walked strange streets with no fear. I dined alone and didn't reach for my phone. Because I was no longer waiting to be filled. I was already full. On my last night abroad, I stood on a balcony and looked out over a city that didn't know my past. There was something beautiful about anonymity. No one here knew the girl who cried on the bathroom floor. No one here knew the version of me who gave too much, too quietly. I could be anything. And the best part, I didn't need to be anyone else. I wasn't rebuilding anymore. I was living, fully, and as the breeze brushed my skin, I whispered not to the man who broke me or the sister who betrayed me, but to the version of me who kept going. Thank you. When I returned, Adrian was waiting at the airport. No flowers, just open arms. He didn't ask what I'd learned. He didn't demand to be part of the newness I carried home. He simply held my bag, kissed my temple, and said, "You look like yourself." And I did. Not the self they tried to erase, but the one I was always meant to become. We drove home in silence. Not awkward, sacred. Because the strongest bonds don't always need words, they rest in presence. I framed one of my articles and hung it in my office. Not the most popular one. Just the first one that told the full truth. My truth. No edits. No softening. I see it every morning when I sit at my desk, and it reminds me I don't write for applause. I write for the woman I used to be. And every word I put into the world is one she never got to say out loud. But now, we speak fluently. Me and her. The broken girl. The reborn woman. The quiet voice that became a storm without warning. Sometimes, I get asked if I'd ever speak to Haley again. If I'd ever forgive. And my answer is always the same. I don't live in that house anymore. I don't decorate rooms I no longer visit. Forgiveness, for me, came quietly in the form of distance. In the way I no longer carried her name in my throat. In the way I no longer flinched at her memory. She still exists, but not in my story. I didn't erase her. I outgrew her. And growth, real growth, doesn't demand permission. One spring afternoon, I hosted a gathering on my rooftop. Candles, music, new friends, Adrian by my side. And in the middle of it all, someone raised a glass to me. To strength, they said, and to becoming the person no one thought you could be. I smiled, glass in hand, but inside, I thought something different. No, this is who I always was. They just never took the time to see it. The world didn't change me. It revealed me. And now I lived in full view, bright, open, undeniable. That night, before bed, I lit one final candle. I didn't make a wish. I made a promise to never again shrink for someone else's comfort, to never again hand over my light just so someone else could feel taller. I had been buried, betrayed, burned, but none of that broke me. It built me. And the woman who now closed her eyes under soft sheets beside someone who loved her without conditions wasn't waiting for closure. She was the closure. For all of them. For him. For her. And for the girl who once thought love had to hurt.